Podcast. I'm your host, Therese, and on today's episode, I want to unpack the genesis of my mental health and wellness advocacy. And I want to preface it by saying that your mental health and wellness is you are accountable for it, okay? It's incumbent on you to take care of yourself. It's incumbent on you to love yourself. It's incumbent on you to heal the childhood trauma that you have within yourself. Because, my friend, nobody is going to come and heal you or do the work for you. So, as most of you would know, I grew up in a home with domestic violence and abuse. I grew up with a lot of trauma where my mother's wish was the only way, her mantra that she said over and over again throughout her life was that her only way out of the marriage was through death. My father had psychiatric illness and was struggling with bipolar and other personality disorders as well, psychosis for a long time. And my mother struggled to keep it all together, but she did her best to protect myself, my twin brother, and my sister. When you grow up in that kind of environment, you're barely surviving. You're not living, you're just barely surviving. And your nervous system is hypervigilant. It's always on guard. You enter into an environment and you're always searching. Of course, all of this happens unconsciously. You're searching for safety, or you're searching to protect yourself. You're searching for someone that could potentially hurt you or harm you, and you want to be sure that you feel safe. Fast forward to when I turned 19, my mother's mantra that her only way out of the marriage was through death ended up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it was through that experience that I came to realize the power of our thoughts and our words, okay? I came to realize that the universe really doesn't have a sense of humor. And if you are constantly thinking and believing that your only way out of a situation is through death, or you're constantly believing that the only way you're going to get out of a relationship is through death, then that is what you will bring, and you will create that. And so began the greatest relationship I would ever have, and that's the one with myself. Following my mother's death, my world turned upside down. I was experiencing what's known as pathological grief. I couldn't accept her death. I was very heavily identified with my mother, so I couldn't see myself as a separate person. I had a codependency with my mother. And it was through my own psychoanalysis that I began to deconstruct and bring to the surface all this trauma, and step by step, I began to rebuild in a very healthy way. It became the therapeutic relationship became the healthy relationship for me. Now, of course, all of this happens unconsciously, and all of this happens if you are fortunate enough to meet with an amazing therapist or psychoanalyst, as I did, who modeled for me what it was to have a safe, a contained, a healthy relationship. That therapeutic relationship is so fundamental to help you, once you've experienced trauma, understand that that's not the way it should be, that trauma is not the norm. What is normal is a healthy relationship. What is normal is to love yourself. What is normal is to be at peace with yourself. And this takes a tremendous amount of time to do. And so as my therapy began when I was it probably took me a year or so after my mother died before I entered therapy. And I thought I would go to therapy for a couple of sessions and it would all be over and done with. And the first question, of course, that my analyst asked me was, tell me about your childhood. And of course, if you've experienced trauma, you spend a great deal of time not wanting to relive a traumatic childhood. But it was part of helping me to reorganize and restructure and create a new narrative for those traumatic experiences. Ones that I could take my mother off the pedestal that I had her on and humanize her. I began to humanize my father and understand that he was deeply, deeply distressed and in his own state of chaos. Through his own childhood, he would act out in a way that was not conducive to our health and our harmony, and he didn't know anything better. And of course, all of this happens over a number of years. So when you embark on the therapeutic journey, I think it's really fundamental to understand what it is that you're dealing with. If you are someone who has had domestic violence in childhood, sexual abuse, sexual assault in childhood, any of those really harrowing experiences that can really mark you for life, I highly recommend that you look into psychodynamic or psychoanalytic therapy. Again, do your research. It's really, really integral, and it is incumbent on you to do the right research to find out what these therapies will offer you, because you want to be in the driver's seat of your own health and wellness. And as I progressed through my psychoanalysis, the sessions would go from 1 to 2, sometimes 3 initially, when I was depressed and experiencing agoraphobia, in deep state of grief, and at one point I was experiencing suicidal ideation. And so I did need intensive therapy initially anyway. And that probably progressed for 2 to 3 times a week for the first 2 or 3, maybe even 4 years. Once I moved past that process, that grief that I was suffering, you know, when you're left with a feeling of you can't function in the world, you can't interact with the world, you can't interact with people. And my agoraphobia was triggered by my mother's death, was triggered by my grief. My anxiety was so heightened, I couldn't be out and around people. I had to be in a safe environment with very little people and the few people that I trusted. And of course, all of this happened with my analyst and with my husband, my loving husband, and my family, and very few friends that I trusted to help support the process and help me move through that. And then, you know, after 4, probably 5 years, you go out, you live in the world, and you have to live, you know. Once you get through that, you start to see the world in a different way, okay? I went from being a person who had polarizing thinking, very black or white, a person who was incredibly judgmental on myself as well as others. My mother was a perfectionist, and so that was then projected onto me. And I started to see the world with hues of color. I started to see more gray. And when you start to change the lens with which you see the world that you look at starts to change, okay? Because we can't exist in isolation, and we don't exist in isolation. Our existence is incumbent on our interaction and our assimilation with society and with others. And I remember my first initial breaking away from analysis was probably when I was about 26 and I was about to have my first child. And, you know, you go back into analysis and you discuss with your analyst that you're ready to go out into the world on your own. And I felt quite comfortable and confident and competent to be able to do that. And a few years down the track, you know, something else will come up and you'll end up back into therapy. And of course, therapy is not linear. And this is what I explain to my own clients in coaching and mentoring. It's never a linear process, you know. Life is a whole gamut of different experiences. It's births, it's deaths, it's funerals, it's divorce, and certain changes in life will have you go back to recalibrate, to strengthen your psyche, strengthen your ability to be able to cope in the world. And so after a few years of being out in the world on my own, I don't really remember exactly what the inciting incident was, but I ended back in analysis. And at this time I remember thinking about the shame that I had experienced. Because when you grow up in a home where there's a lot of abuse and you're in survival mode, and my mother was an extreme perfectionist and she was very controlling, understandably so, because everything was in disarray. My father had psychiatric illness. Your needs are not met, and it's not because she didn't want to attend to our needs. She was a wonderful mother and did the best that she could, but I didn't want to burden her. I knew that she was dealing with more than enough, and I never wanted to ask her for anything because I didn't want to contribute to making her feel worse. And when your needs are not met in childhood, you grow up with a sense of wanting to people please. You either become a narcissist or you people please, and I was a people pleaser. And you don't people please because you necessarily want to please people. You people please because you want to feel loved, and you want to feel validated, and you want to feel included. And it's all part of wanting to, again, interact with the world. But I do remember this time when I went back to my analysis where we were talking a lot about the shame that I experienced in my body. My mother had experienced a tremendous amount of shame in her own body, having experienced female genital mutilation. And it was a traumatic experience for her, as you could imagine, but it was one that she never shared with me. I only found out about that experience after she died. And so that shame and that trauma that she experienced was then projected onto me. There was a tremendous amount of shame around my body, around the exploring of my body, around anything to do with sexuality or enjoyment of sex. And so that was internalized and projected onto me. And I remember thinking, I want to be able to be comfortable in my body. I want to be able to feel secure in myself. I want to be able to feel okay with my anatomy. If I wanted to look at my body, I didn't want to cringe. I didn't want to feel that it was dirty or shameful. And so that period really marked for me an integration of healthy attunement to my own body. I started to feel good about being in my skin. I started to feel that I really, there was nothing shameful about my body. I started to feel like my body was a part of me. And that's all part and parcel of the process of integration, the process of analysis, the process of healthy therapy. And I remembered that was a time also where I could look at myself naked and feel good about myself and not feel ashamed of my body or my anatomy. And that was a really, really integral moment for me. That was a really important time for me, because up until then I felt a tremendous amount of shame in my body, or shame at wanting or desiring any sexual activity, or anything to do with sex or sexuality seemed salacious, seemed dirty. And of course, growing up in an Egyptian home that's very patriarchal, anything to do with sex and sexuality was always considered dirty. And so I had to unpack all of that stuff and all of the superstitions that surrounded my body and my sexuality that my mother had projected onto me. I had to undo all of that. And again, the lens with which I viewed the world started to become even more colorful and even more clear. And I started to, in my intuition that I had as a young girl, my curiosity that I experienced as a child started to resurface. And I started to trust it more. I started to cultivate it more. I started to feel so good in my body that there wasn't anything anyone could say that would make me feel shameful or ashamed. And my therapy would continue. Things would come up, we would talk about them, we would discuss them, and it would continue. And I'd go out into the world and assimilate and consolidate information and build more confidence, build more self-assurance, start to believe in the magic that I had as a child. The magic, we come into the world with so much. We come into the world perfect. We come into the world with love. We come into the world feeling amazing, spontaneous, present, believing in magic. This all started to come to the surface again. And I began to cultivate it, and I began to trust my intuition. And the more I trusted it, the stronger it became. And I'm not saying that I didn't rely on my logic, because intellect is obviously integral to your ability to be able to function in the world. I'm saying that I trusted my intuition as a guiding faculty, as a nudge, as when I got a feeling to do something or not do it, I trusted it more. And my creativity started to come to the surface again, and I began to cultivate my writing and cultivate my painting. And I was a voraciously curious person, so I continued to read and read about science and read about the arts and read about culture. And I found that there was a confluence in all of these faculties, that everything was connected. Everything was connected. Arts, politics, commerce, science, everything was connected, and we were all part of this amazing connection that happened in the world. And so I would take that into my therapy, and I would talk to my analyst about it. And, you know, she would encourage me, or she would encourage me to move in a particular direction. And all the while, I continued to write, because writing for me was an outlet for me, but it was also a way of making sense of the world. It was a way of making sense of the tragedies that happened in my life. It was a way of making sense of the joys that I would experience. And, you know, I continued to trust all of that, and my analysis continued. And then I would move away from it again and go out into the world and explore different things and come back because something had happened, you know. And so therapy is not linear. It's never linear, and it's never going to be the same for two individuals. And I truly want to encourage you to really ask yourself what it is that you want out of your therapy. And I promise you that the greatest relationship you're ever going to have is the one you have with yourself. Because when you realize that the person you love spending the most time with is yourself, it's the most incredible feeling in the world. And when I say that you love yourself, I don't mean it in a vain way. I mean that you have so much respect for yourself. And what you'll find is that people will start to respect you. And the old people that you had in your life will move away, because you are growing and you are expanding. And as you grow and expand, new people will come into your life that reflect that same energy that you have, because everything in the universe is energy, and we attract the sum of our vibrations. And so if you know, the more that I started to love and respect myself, the more I started to notice that people were starting to do the same to me, because I was respecting them. And in respecting them, that's what they would give to me. In loving myself, I would meet people who would equally love me. I wasn't looking to find someone to fill a void in my soul, because the reality is nobody's going to fix you, my friend. You're going to have to do the work on yourself. And if you're looking to get a pill, as we live in a world where people want things done yesterday, no amount of medication is going to change the way that you see the world. Medication will only alleviate or help to take the stress out of the symptoms. It's like putting a band-aid on a gushing internal wound. You still have to do the work yourself. And I'm not advocating for no medication or for medication. That decision is incumbent on you in relation with your therapist. You can come to that decision yourself. What I am saying is you still have to do the work. And what you'll find is the more energy that you've put into yourself, the more love you put into yourself, the more investment you put into yourself, the more you will meet with people who will do the same for you in return. And when we heal ourselves, we heal the world, because everything starts with us. Everything. Our thoughts, as Mahatma Gandhi has said once, our thoughts create our words create our habits create our actions create our destiny. Everything starts with you. So I encourage you to invest in yourself. I encourage you to, instead of, paying the money to go online dating and find someone that can, come to love you, love yourself, my friend. Put that money into finding the right therapist. Put that money and that time and that energy into healing yourself. The trauma you experienced as a childhood, you've heard this before, is not your fault. But your healing and your health and your wellness is your responsibility. And nobody is going to do it for you. Okay? The more work I put into myself, the better I started to feel, the happier I started to feel. One of my greatest fears when I embarked on the therapeutic journey was that I would live a life of abject misery. And that's probably most everybody's fear when they experience depression and they don't want to recognize it. It doesn't last forever. But the more that you resist it, it will persist. Depression is such a liberating thing, because what it does is it brings to attention the unresolved trauma, the unresolved emotion. It's a blessing. Depression is a blessing because it puts you in your body. You can not go anywhere else but your body, even though you want to escape. That feeling of not wanting to wake up in the morning, that feeling of wanting to die, that feeling of wanting to just die in your sleep, whatever it is when you're experiencing depression, is bringing to attention pain that needs to be resolved, trauma that needs to be healed. We cannot heal the world if we don't heal ourselves, and it's incumbent on each individual to find their own therapy, to find what works for you. And finding the right therapist is like finding the right friend, but we all have therapeutic boundaries. We all have to adhere to professional boundaries and etiquette, and this is integral to your own health and wellness. So if you go to one therapist and you don't like them, or you feel judged, or you feel that you don't feel safe, move on, find another one. Go by a recommendation. Recommendations are so good when you're looking for therapists, because oftentimes you have similar values to the person that's recommending a therapist, and the chances are you will have some kind of symbiosis with that therapist. Look into that. But the healing of the world, the healing when we look at the world, when my children who are 27 and almost 30 tell me, Mum, what is happening on this planet? It concerns me. It makes me sad. And the only way we can heal the world is to start with healing ourselves. I hope that this episode has been beneficial to you. For more on my work, you know what to do. I wish you a life of peace, one of purpose and prosperity. Remember, when we heal ourselves, we heal the world. I'm Therese Bolden, and I can't wait to connect with you. Bye for now.